Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to today's Leader Professional Development Program webinar. I'm your moderator, Jim Heft of TRADOC's Communication Directorate. Our topic this session is a very timely one, ethical leadership, and we're pleased to be hearing from two outstanding leaders. Retired General Carter Ham, President and CEO of the Association of the United States Army, and hosting today is the 17th Commanding General of U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command, General Paul E. Funk II. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks, Jim. I'm really pleased.
So I know the generals do have a wealth of information on this particular topic, but we're also going to be checking throughout the live stream for your great questions on Facebook and the TRADOC watch page. If we happen to not get to those questions, we will share several supplemental short videos over social media, especially on our LinkedIn channel, which is at U.S. Army TRADOC in the coming weeks. Finally, continue the conversation and build your cohesive teams in your squadron unit. Take what you learned here today and talk about how it applies to your team. With that, I'm pleased to introduce TRADOC's Commanding General, General Funk.
Thanks, Jim. And let me just take a minute and introduce, and actually he needs no introduction, but let me just talk a little bit about the experience of General Carter Ham. What a tremendous opportunity to hear from one of the most ethical leaders I've ever met in my career. He and I share a commonality of actually commanding the Big Red One. He has been a factor in my life since I was a very young lieutenant colonel, and he is one of the great leaders of our Army. He has since then gone on to lead in civilian life and has led an incredibly selfless service life. He's commanded at every level. He took us through what was at that time a hot button issue, and now seems like it was in our rearview mirror, which was don't ask, don't tell. And he was there when he was the overall commander when the Benghazi attack happened. So Carter Ham has not been tested. He's a tested, true, inspirational leader, and it's my opportunity to say welcome to TRADOC. Thanks for making the drive up the route, and thanks for being here with us, sir. Thanks very much for coming today.
Well, thanks very much, General Funk. It's really good to be here with you today, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. So just one, it's impolite to correct the host, but I'm going to correct the host. So 100 years ago, when you were just a very, very young person, I think not even in the Army yet, your dad was the commander of the National Training Center.
That's right.
And Captain and Major Ham was serving at the National Training Center in those days, long before I think you joined the Army. But so my relationship with the Funk family is pretty long-standing.
That's right, absolutely, and he remembers those days very fondly as well.
Absolutely, those were indeed good days,
Yep.
Different days than
Yes.
we're encountering today.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Yep.
So, Jim, back to you. Let's get started.
Yeah, let's get started, and let's talk with the issue that everybody's talking about. We've got a memorandum from the Joint Force from the combined generals, and we also have a message to the Army community about the recent events at the Capitol. So I just want to read a couple quick excerpts that are directly applicable to what we're going to be talking about today. First, from the memo to the Joint Force: as service members, we must embody the values and ideals of the nation. We support and defend the Constitution. Any act to disrupt the constitutional process is not only against our traditions, values, and oath, it's against the law. And then from the Army memo: the nation expects all members of the United States Army to follow the law and do the right things the right way, whether we are in or out of uniform. To maintain the sacred trust of the American people, it is important that all those who represent the Army in any capacity remain models of professionalism, character, and integrity. I know both of you have thoughts on the stunning actions of January 6th. So where do we go as an Army community and values and trust?
Well, I think trust is the operative word. That's really what the profession of arms is based upon, is that foundation of trust between leader and led, between leaders and civilian authorities, and between the Army the trust of the Army and the nation. And so I think it's really, I think that focus on trust by the Joint Chiefs and by the senior Army leaders is very, very appropriate. These are unprecedented times, maybe not quite unprecedented in our history, but certainly in our lifetime, unprecedented events. And the fact that I think that the Joint Chiefs and the senior Army leaders, the Secretary, the Chief, the Sergeant Major of the Army, felt it necessary to say, hey, remember who you are. Remember who you are as an individual professional. Remember who you are as an institution. And remember what we are grounded in. We are grounded in that oath to the Constitution. It's an important reminder at a particularly sensitive and critical time for our nation.
I could not agree more. And to tell you, we hit on values. The Army's base is values, and it is on trust. And it is, in fact, those things that make us the bedrock. We get the privilege to wear the cloth of our nation. Every day, we have to lead. This is the jersey of the greatest team on earth. We have to lead that in a better place every day. And to do that, we have to do things based on our values and based on our laws and regulations. So I think that never forgetting that we represent our nation is important to remember.
I think in a situation like this, couldn't be more apparent about that relationship between civilian authority and military personnel. And so I guess the question in terms of ethical leadership, where do you find those lines?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting challenge, and it becomes, this relationship between military and civilian. Well, the principle is never in question of civilian control of the military, civilian leadership of the military. That's established, well established in our nation as custom, as tradition, encapsulated in law, and so that's very fine. It gets a little bit more difficult in practice, all right? And I recall one instance. I was a one-star serving at the Pentagon, and was in a session with some folks from the National Security Council staff, and a particularly fairly contentious matter, and we were kind of arguing back and forth on positions. And finally, one of the young National Security Council staffers turns to me and just says, "Well, General, you just don't understand civilian control of the military." And I gave probably the most inappropriate answer ever given. And I said, "I understand it perfectly, and it's not you." So it is understanding of what is civilian control, and that the authority that rests with those who are elected, the commander in chief, elected, the members of Congress who establish the laws, practices, and resources which are available to the military, and those who are appointed and confirmed by the Congress, the Secretary of Defense and the Service Secretaries. So it's understanding, first of all, formally, what are those authorities and with whom do those authorities rest? And then it is, I would describe civilian control of the military very much as a partnership. And I think we've seen some recent examples of where that's been quite good, and perhaps somewhere it's perhaps worth further study. But when the civilian leadership certainly has the responsibility to establish the objectives, the broad goals for the employment of the military, how the military is going to be structured, and then the military leaders are the implementers of that. The military leaders have an obligation to provide their best military advice, consistent with law, policy, and their own experience. This is why those who rise to high rank are ultimately have to be confirmed by the Senate, the Congress, saying we have trust and confidence in Paul Funk to execute these broad authorities. But even with that, General Funk operates within a framework that is established by civilian authority. It doesn't mean there aren't tense conversations. There often are, but at the end of the day, it is the civilian authority, whether it's Commander-in-Chief, Secretary of Defense, Service Secretary, that says, thank you for your contributions. This is what we're going to do. And then the military then says, you are the duly appointed, duly elected in case of the commander-in-chief, and that's what we're going to do, and we put all of our energy behind executing that lawful order.
And both of you have been under intense pressure and scrutiny by the natures of your office. How do you handle that in an ethical manner?
Well, I mean, you got to, first of all, it goes back to trust, and it goes back to your values. It goes back to all your experience growing up in the military, and then it goes to, as General Ham said, it actually goes to these are the values, these are the rules, these are the laws and regulations that cause us. And I like to trust my gut. My gut tells me right and wrong, and in every case, doing the hard right is the right way to go, and we see that all the time. And
over a 38-year career, you've seen the gamut. What tools have you learned, or what techniques have you used in your decision-making process?
So, Jim, I think the key thing that senior leaders can do, particularly rising to the level where General Funk serves, and at the 3- and 4-star level, it's an understanding that many, not all, but many of the civilians who come into those very senior positions do not bring to those positions the same depth of experience as the military leader may be. It's not a question about who's in charge. We know the civilians are in charge. It's about question interesting experience. It's a little bit like platoon leader, platoon sergeant relationship, right? The platoon leader comes in fresh out of the officer basic, out of BOLIC, and the platoon leader is in charge. There's no question about that. But the platoon sergeant has the background, has the experience, has the tactical knowledge to help that lieutenant, that platoon leader, be in charge. And I think so that communication between senior military and senior civilian, particularly appointees, is absolutely vital to this trust that General Funk talks about between civilian and military leaders. And the more we can do that, the more we can show respect for one another, given different backgrounds, without ever any question about who's really in charge. And the military officials do, in fact, give their very candid, very ethical, best military advice, and ultimately the decision rests with civilian authorities.
Absolutely. Competence, candor, commitment, and then, of course, our ability to have the courage to advise to the strongest level. But once the decision's made, if it's legal, moral, and ethical, you drive it, and that's what we get paid to do.
Now, loyalty conflicts and principles, do they ever come in conflict, and do they come in conflict mainly with like organizational practices, or maybe things, personal agendas, things that have maybe found themselves in the culture for whatever reason? What have you seen throughout both of your careers in that, and how have you managed or dealt with them?
I think that I do share a bit of a concern in that regard, that it's to remind ourselves that in service, the loyalty is to the nation, the loyalty is to your oath, the loyalty is to the Constitution, and we sometimes get swept up in a personal relationship with a particular sergeant major or a particular commander, or a particular general, and it's not that you shouldn't be loyal to that senior leader, but that loyalty must always be subordinated to the broader sense of loyalty. Loyalty is an Army value for a reason, and and we don't talk about loyalty, to my battalion commander. I don't talk about loyalty to my first sergeant. Those are okay, but the real loyalty is to the nation. And if we get caught up sometimes in this, that I'm going to do whatever I can to support General Funk, that's not quite the kind of loyalty that we're seeking. What we're looking for is, I want you to be loyal to your oath, loyal to the nation, do everything you can to fulfill your mission. Certainly under General Funk's guidance and direction, but it's less about personal loyalty to a particular leader than it is to the set of ideals to which we have each sworn.
That's loyalty to the ideals that founded this great institution is the important piece of that. I agree wholeheartedly.
So I'm very new to the Army. July was when I was hired here at TRADOC. My background is Navy and joint. And so we have the joint planning process. There is like the Navy planning process. How does Army training and doctrine and our planning processes fit tangibly into this ethics conversation?
Well, the Army's very doctrinally based, right? So we have FM 6-22, which is our leadership manual, which gives us a framework to exercise, and even provides examples and ways to attack ethical behavior in your organizations. If we open our books and read the doctrine, we will see I guess the right word is a footprint or actually some sort of a blueprint on how to proceed in an ethical fashion and how to train ethical decision-making and ethical leadership in your organizations. Getting back to the books and understanding our profession and driving on our Army values, and then using our doctrine to back that up so everything has a common reference is the right way to go in this regard. The Army is big time into those kinds of things.
I would echo that, and I think in a previous life I was the chief of light infantry doctrine at the infantry school for a period of time, and so the Army is, as General Funk said, very grounded in doctrine, and it is important for Army professionals, uniformed and civilian, to understand that doctrinal underpinning for what the Army does, why the Army is, and for particular aspects of Army operations. But that's not enough. That's the baseline understanding that each Army professional must possess, and it is a matter of study and self-study. I find myself, even as a soldier for life now, occasionally going back to Army doctrinal manuals to say, what does the Army say about the Army profession? What is what is current? That is important. But again, that's not enough. When you combine that doctrinal knowledge and understanding, which is facilitated by small group discussions, frankly, and then you combine it with the examples of a David Bellavia. All right, and that's when you start to get really a culture of professionalism, of strong ethical underpinning to Army actions. When you combine that doctrinal understanding with the personal examples of the Army values, that's when we really start to get something.
It's great. Self-study is a phenomenal piece of this thing, and then operational experiences, and actually taking the advantage of learning from other people's experiences is the real key to our Army. The after-action review, speaking all the way back to our discussion on the National Training Center, for example, that was revolutionary in our Army. And it changed the way we examine and operate and what it is we do. That's what it has changed. It was, while the CTCs were the big idea, the combat training centers were the big idea, the after-action review was the enduring process of learning from each other's experiences, well, good and bad, so that we don't make the same mistakes twice. And that has been underpinning my career for years, 34 and a half years. That was the key to this thing. And it doesn't matter what level you're at, whether you're a private or a four-star general, you learn from those experiences. Our doctrine gives us a way to analyze the procedures. Our experiences give us the richness that we need to actually explore where it is. And if you bring out our Center for Military History and learning from historical examples of things that didn't go as well on the battlefield or losses that we've had and lessons that we've learned the hard way so that we don't repeat those in training again, is absolutely where we have to go.
So you mentioned something, two things that I found really important in your answer there. Number one is that this is not a large strategic officer-only type conversation that we're having. This is from private
Yes.
to 4-star.
Correct.
And then the second thing is the after-action reviews. I know in my experience, rank disappears, and in order for it to be truthful and honest, you have to have those forthright conversations. Has that been your experiences throughout your years?
Absolutely. It's actually what the Chief Staff of the Army has asked us to do now in terms of what he calls what we call the 3 corrosives, right? Suicide, sexual assault, and harassment, and in fact, extremism. Yeah, we have to examine those. We have to drive those things out of our force. To do that, we have to listen, find the right approach, and then attack those problem areas. That is what we have to do in order to maintain the trust of the American people. Trust goes all the way through the chain of command. And we have to do those things. We have to build formal and informal feedback loops. And so that is also a part of this business, I believe.
Yeah. So, Jim, I was just, one point I would say, in the after-action review process, rank doesn't go away. Right? I mean, after all, we are a hierarchical organization. Yeah. But it's an unbelievably powerful leadership example, where the senior leader makes herself open for the kind of dialogue that furthers the unit's ability to accomplish the mission. That can only happen when the senior leader, whether that's a platoon leader or a 4-star general, is present and has set the conditions to say it's okay for you to voice concern about, hey, whether it's a tactical operation, hey, this didn't really go well.
Right.
I by the way, having been subjected to some of that as a battalion commander, I think and Mr. Pascal here at TRADOC can verify this, I think I still hold the record as a battalion commander for the shortest movement to contact in the history of the United States Army. I think we went 7 minutes from the time we crossed the line of departure till we were all dead. So that was a great after-action review. But the senior leader has to make it clear by actions and by words to say it's okay to have this open and free dialogue. Yeah, and that's how we learn.
I agree. So I used to start mine, speaking of short movements to contact, and when I was a squadron commander, with what I failed to do was, and then you go from there and learn those lessons, and frankly, you learn them. A human form learns a couple of ways: significant emotional experience and repetition. And what you hope is you're not repeating those same lessons every time.
So where are we today in the Army in terms of incorporating ethics in our leadership development programs, particularly with NCOs or even at West Point, the ROTC programs? How are we incorporating ethical training into, general Army everyday life? Well,
in TRADOC, we actually have set ethical training processes. We have it in basic combat training. It's about 2.5 hours. We talk about the characteristics of the Army ethic. We talk about Army values. We talk about the ethical processing model. Then in BOLIC, which is the second lieutenant courses, there's about 3.5 hours spread across the spectrum of training. What's interesting is in the captain career course, we've now taken this and taken ethical decision making and it made it part of the everyday fabric of it's not just a set block, it's an ethical decision making process throughout the captain's career course, which is a 1-on-16 engagement where you're learning from your peers. It uses the adult learning model. It's a phenomenal tool to learn from each other.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so the structure inside the Army and inside Training and Doctrine Command, the Center for the Army Profession and Leadership, is obviously a key component of that. And we've already talked about the essential role of doctrine. What I think is, for me as a soldier, what didn't work so well, frankly, was, okay, for the next hour, we're going to talk about the Army ethic.
Right.
And we're going to put slides up and do all that kind of stuff. What worked better for me was when the ethical components of leader development were woven into other training events. So whether it's a simulation where you insert an ethical dilemma that a leader has to cope with. Maybe it's a famine or a disaster that has occurred in the area of operations. You're trying to fight a fight, and then you've got this other disaster. Maybe it's again in simulation or in a training exercise. It's leaders coming upon evidence of a war crime or other. And how do they deal with that? That to me was always more useful to me in the practical exercise, in the situational training exercise, and in simulation, more so than sitting in a classroom and say, okay, ladies and gentlemen, for the next hour, we're going to talk about the law of land warfare or something like that.
That was the TRADOC of old. I will tell you now, you can go to the Army Training Network at any time and have situational training exercises on ethical behavior, everything you can imagine, from leadership dilemmas to what we're going to do in terms of DE&I. We are, in fact, making these products using this this delivery method of Army Training Network to get after so you can have these discussions in your organizations, because the vast majority of the people spend 80% of their time in operational units, which is where we have to use those as leadership laboratories every day.
For sure. Just a reminder to the audience, if you do have questions, please, write them on Facebook or also our chat room. And we actually have one right now from Justin on Facebook. He asks the question, General Funk references his gut in ethical decision making. How do we cultivate guts in our members like you have?
Great question. And it comes through experiential learning, as I said. It comes from tough training where you have to make ethical dilemmas or decisions. It comes from having peer-to-peer discussions on things. So it's an experience piece. You're trusting your gut. You have to have some experience before you can just let your gut take over.
Yep. So in retirement, gut has a different meaning, than it did in uniform. But I think the other aspect, another aspect that plays into that experience that General Funk and other senior leaders have is mentoring, and the opportunity to engage with others. Now, when you get to General Funk's level, we have a tendency to think about mentoring as senior to subordinate. There are not very many people in the Army senior to General Funk. But you get mentoring in a lot of different ways, and some of the most effective mentors that I encountered in my time as a general were the sergeants major and those senior civilians who would kind of pull you aside and say, hey, General, have you thought about this? Was kind of their very polite way to say, hey, you're about to screw this up.
Exactly.
But you might want to think about things a different way. So mentoring has an important aspect in building Justin, that gut, that experience level. And
I get mentored every day. And sometimes it comes in form of face-to-face like this. Sometimes it comes from somebody will point something out to me on the internet that I perhaps should or shouldn't do. Or, in fact, you get one of your peers or subordinates to come up and say, hey, I've been thinking about this. What do you think? The mentoring piece in our Army is so important. And really, really is a component of leadership that is, if you're going to put anything in your kit bag, being a good mentor for folks is incredibly important.
And having a good mentor.
And finding the right mentors is really critical.
Let's talk a little bit about processes, though. Sometimes ethical decisions don't get made, especially by leaders. And I guess the question that's out there is, do we have processes in place for soldiers and civilians? IG comes to mind a little bit, but to raise these ethical concerns without fear of retribution.
Yeah, I think this is an area where we can improve. John Funk and I were talking before this about the Fort Hood report, and I think that's one of the things that came through in the Fort Hood report was that soldiers, non-commissioned officers at all level, in some cases, didn't feel that they had the opportunity, were encouraged, or were listened to by others in the chain of command. And so that's something that requires constant work and constant nurturing. It's a really easy thing, and it becomes easier the more senior you get, to say, You know, I have an open door policy. I want to hear a wide variety of opinions. I want to hear what's on your mind. That's really easy to say. It's much more difficult to actually do that. You know, again, because we are a hierarchical organization, you know, it takes a pretty significant degree of moral courage for somebody to, you know, for a young soldier, young non-commissioned officer, to kind of raise their hand and say, hey, Sergeant Major, hey, Colonel, hey, General, I don't think this is going well, and we should talk about it. That's easy for old generals to say, you should do that, and I want you to do that. It's much more difficult for that young soldier, that young civilian, to actually do that. So fostering a climate where that kind of candid conversation is encouraged falls to the responsibility of the senior leader to set those conditions. But again, much more easily said than done. And I think that's an area where the Army can continually seek to improve.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it's feedback mechanisms, both formal and informal. And we have listening posts in our units. We understand where we're looking and what we're trying to do, but you got to nurture those all the time, and you got to be willing to listen to what it is that's occurring, or at least get through the filters. And the moral courage to come up and stand up and say these things is right. And so I think the more we can build feedback loops that are trusted, the better off we're going to be.
Now, we've talked a lot about trust throughout the course of this conversation, and I think it's important, again, that we look at trust as something that takes a really long time to build, and it can be eroded, evaporated in an instant. How do we foster that culture of trust and continue to improve and grow it?
You got to build on trust every day. You got to. I told you, we're trusted by the American people to wear the cloth of our nation. Well, we have to do that in an ethical manner. We have to understand what it means that the American people expect of us. They expect more of us, and we should own up to that. And where we fall down, we need to conduct an after-action review and then make changes and then drive on. The people need us to be a trusted institution in this nation, and that's what we have to strive for every day.
If I may, Jim, so I hope some of you had an opportunity yesterday. This is a shameless plug for AUSA, but we had the opportunity to have a conversation with Sergeant Major of the Army Grinston. And this is one of the areas that he spoke to yesterday. He says, think about this. He says, if you're in combat with your squad, with your platoon, and with any unit, and one of the soldiers is combat and says, hey, I need some help here. You know, whether they're being suppressed or whether there's an explosion or whatever it is. In combat, if a soldier, if anybody in uniform says, hey, I need some help, man, we do that, right? We rush to the sound of the guns. We immediately respond to that requirement for help. And the SMA asks, well, why doesn't that same characteristic carry over into non-combat situations? So that if you're in garrison, and a soldier either voices concern or you see a soldier that needs some help, why don't we instantaneously, just like we do in combat, why doesn't the leader instantaneously respond to that need for help in a non-combat situation? So I think I thought that was very interesting. And if you didn't see SMA Grinston, again, a shameless plug for it, just go to ausa.org. And his presentation conversation with SMA retired Dan Daly is archived there. But I think that's this trust between leader and led at every level is one that we've got to continually focus on, and it's built by action.
You recently wrote in an article for War on the Rocks, trust builds further when a drill sergeant takes that little bit of extra time to show a new soldier how to properly accomplish a task to standard. Trust builds when first-line leaders, often corporals or sergeants, actually listen when a new soldier joins their unit and demonstrate by their actions that they genuinely care. Talk about throughout your career how you were able to see that in action and how you implemented it yourself.
Well, in the very best practices, it is those great non-commissioned officers, other first-line leaders who do just that, who do listen, who do take the extra time to help a soldier who may be struggling with an issue. Maybe it's an issue in training. Maybe it's an issue, frankly, in personal finance. Maybe it's an issue in a personal relationship. Maybe it's a family thing. Maybe it's any kind of issue. But the leader demonstrating genuine caring for that soldier, for that young civilian, and saying, okay, I may not be the one that can help you through this, but we're going to find the right person to help you through whatever that challenge is. Demonstrating through their actions that they are genuinely concerned. As a young officer, I served in the 22nd Infantry Regiment, whose motto is deeds, not words. It's a pretty good mantra, I think, for leaders at every level. People listen to what you say, they'll abide by that, but they're affected more by what you do.
So, I think we got to think about how do we bring people into our organizations? How do you welcome them? I think we got to be, I use this term a lot and sometimes they're criticized for it, but I think we got to be positively intrusive into people's lives. We got to understand who their spouses are, who their kids are. We got to understand where they're living, what they're doing, how it is that are they having some of these issues, because we have programs for everything in the doggone Army. And frankly, if we know you're having this issue, if an engaged leader can find a solution to it. But we have to have that basics of trust to say, okay, my leader's going to help me through this issue. So I think the more we can build on that, the more we show folks that we care, that we can be kind to one another, so that we can have a dialogue. That doesn't mean we have to be soft-hearted or any of that business. What it means is we got to care for one another's issues and then help take them on and help find a solution. I look at the essential characteristics of the Army profession: military expertise, honorable service, trust, esprit de corps, and then the stewardship of the profession. All of those are built on trust. So our legal and ethical moral standards built on trust are the bedrock of what it is we're trying to get done. And it goes everything from, General Creighton Abrams, who was the Chief of Staff of the Army, said, the Army is people. That is so true. And that's why the Chiefs program and the SMA's program on people first. That's what it means. We got to care enough about each other as individuals to make our units, organizations, and structures stronger and better. That's what we got to be able to do.
And inherently what you're talking about is bunk fundamental number 25.
Yeah, the Army is a people business. It is. It is. It really doesn't matter what MOS you are, what branch you are, what kind of cool badges you wear. It's about taking care of one another and understanding that we're all in this together.
In general, those fundamentals, they came from a personal story. Where did that one originate?
The Army is a people business. I actually got from the statement General Abrams said, and it's so true. It absolutely is. And that goes to learning and mentoring and peer-to-peer mentorship and things. I've seen that. The best outfits are, the best outfit, care for one another. How are you branding your relationship? If you think of basic combat training, we've now taken out the shark attack and we're turned into the first 100 yards. And the first thing that sergeant says to those young men and women that get off that bus at the infantry school is, follow me. Think about the responsibility of that. How critical is that? And that should take that young man or woman and say, man, I'm in an organization that cares about me, that wants to lead me through some of this adversity to become something better on the other side. Think about that. Follow me.
So we have another question from Facebook. It comes from James. Building trust requires leaders to allow their soldiers to fail, learn, and develop without fear of retribution. Some leaders are too afraid to fail and don't foster the aforementioned within their organization. What is your advice for those leaders struggling with this?
Yeah, James, that's a very real concern. Again, we all leaders say, you know, I don't want to cultivate an environment of zero defects, but in many cases we actually do, you know, in large ways and small. And I think there's a clear line. There's violations of, committing a crime, ethical shortcomings, those kinds of things. Those are kind of in the unforgivable category. So I think those are in a different category. But God, if I got fired every time I made a mistake, I wouldn't have made it beyond PFC. I mean, so it is leaders that take the opportunity that when someone makes a mistake, to help them learn and grow from that. Sometimes in painful ways, right? And that just is the case. But it is difficult. But I also worry that in our environment, in the Army culture, that we've sometimes made failure. We say it's not zero defect, but it is. So we expect every company commander to report, 100% completion of every task that's assigned to them. Well, in reality, very rarely does 100% of a company do anything. Somebody's on emergency leave, somebody's in school, somebody's off doing something else. But yet, if you're the company commander, if you're the only company commander in your brigade that reports, hey, I got to 92%, I didn't get to 100%, then how is that treated? Does the brigade commander say, well, Captain Funk, you're the only one in the brigade who failed this? But yet maybe you're the only one in the brigade who's being honest about this.
That's right.
And so I think that kind of mentality in the leader has got to be said. Okay, if you fail, what are we going to do about that? How do we help you learn from this experience? Again, it's one of those leader traits that everybody subscribes to. Very easy to say, very difficult to do. And I, more times than I care to remember, have either been on the receiving end of, hey, you screwed this up, or been on the delivery end of, hey, you screwed this up. And sometimes you gotta swallow hard, and bite your tongue, and say, okay, Captain Funk, screwed this up, but.
Not that I haven't heard that before.
But this is somebody who has a valuable contribution to continue to make. And how do I help them? How do I help that individual learn? And how do I help the organization learn so that they are better the next time around?
Yeah, one of the great quotes of the 20th century was the one from Teddy Roosevelt. It's not the critic who counts. It is the doer of deeds who could have done or should have done them better. But the credit goes to the man, and in this case, men and women in the arena. You're not going to make the right decisions every time. Yeah, that's not possible.
Nope.
But if you're doing it in an ethical manner, and you're doing what benefits your organization, there are ways to make sure that we can overcome those things.
One of the purposes for the Leader Professional Development webinar was to talk about diversity. And I think each and every one of us has our own personal code of ethics. How do we take the 550,000 person force and create organizational ethics out of that? Because everybody has their different idea.
Well, you have doctrine to start with, and that gives you the baseline for everybody to build up, the Army values, for example. And then from there, you do training. How do we learn? Significant emotional experience and repetition, right? So then from that, you then do a series of training exercises. You actually work your way through these. You try to discuss some of these dilemmas before they happen. So you do them in simulation, or you do them as part of a situational training exercise, which allows you then to discuss them in an open way so you can learn together before you actually have to get committed to that. That would be my suggestion.
I think this is an area where the Army actually has made some significant progress. I enlisted in 1973. That's before most of you were born. I get it. But through basic training at Fort Jackson, infantry AIT at Fort Polk, and on, the emphasis was on creating the big green machine. Every soldier this was a much larger army, but getting every individual to conform to the ideal model of a soldier. We've learned from that over the past generations, and I think today the Army looks at that and says, I don't want everybody to be the same. SMA Grinston talks about this. Don't tell me that you just see green.
Right.
If you just see green, you're not seeing the person. And it's an institutional recognition that the strength that comes from the backgrounds, experiences, cultures, beliefs, practices of a very diverse Army actually bring tremendous strength to that Army.
Yeah.
In a simple way, in my view, the Army should broadly represent the nation that it serves. Frankly, the enlisted force is pretty good in that regard, and the officer force isn't. And there's work to be done there to bring those elements of diversity, not just the outward manifestations of diversity, of race and sex and other ethnicity, things that are measurable, but diversity of backgrounds, diversity of education, diversity of experiences. All of those combined will make the Army stronger.
And they make that our diversity is our strength, the bottom line. And so the better we can be, the more diverse we are, the better off we're going to be, and to lead the nation. We have to lead the nation now. Okay, so let's do this. And so we have to continue to examine this. Going all the way back, though, my father taught me this in a story.
Talk to soldiers where they are.
Yeah.
All right, and lots of soldiers, particularly younger soldiers of all ranks, younger civilians across the Army profession, social media is their means of connectivity. And so if the Army is not present there, if the Army is not taking advantage of the tools, the opportunities that social media affords the Army, we're missing an opportunity. Now, again, if some of you heard SMA Grinston yesterday, soldiers that go to social media and raise issues there. Frankly, I think most older military leaders was like, that's okay, but I'd also like you to bring your issue to your squad leader, bring your issue to your platoon sergeant, bring your issue to your company commander and first sergeant. But the reality is social media is here, it's to stay, it's active, and there are opportunities for the Army to leverage that. I know the Army is leveraging social media for the deployment of training and other very valuable leader development opportunities.
Absolutely. On the flip side of that, let's not let social media replace the fact our leadership and our personal responsibility. And we talked about courage and candor, right? So and having the courage as a private to talk to the general. Social media can give you some informal feedback loops, but there is nothing that says I trust you better than taking your issue to a squad leader or a leader in your organization and getting the help you need. The trust in the chain of command is paramount to our operational and strategic narratives.
Yeah, social media has definitely offered a little bit of flattening of the information environment,
right. Yeah.
But it certainly doesn't replace good leadership and strength.
Also, and I like to avoid the three personas. Everybody's got there's a work, home, and then what you see on social media. And sometimes courage takes different forms.
Yeah, keyboard courage sometimes gets a little too exciting at times. How about just this concept of ethos, though? How does diversity make organizations better in terms of developing a code of ethics?
General Ham explained that perfectly a little bit ago. It's all of the different experiences, that education, leadership. It's everything. The diversity of thought, of how you were raised, all those things bring us all together, even from what region of the country or nation or world you're from. Everybody brings a diverse background. It's fascinating. I always ask two questions when I give a coin or talk to a young trooper. Why'd you join our Army, and why do you continue to serve? And what I find from those is this diversity of thought. Some join to get away from things, some join to become part of something bigger than themselves, some join for the college money. There's a ton of reasons why they join. Why they stay is almost invariably about the people. Almost invariably. They like leading soldiers, or they like being part of something bigger than themselves. Although the people that they have become now grown up with are absolutely their friends, family, and it's an amazing way to see this. So I think our ethos, the warrior ethos, that ability to say, send me, is so to our.
But Jim, I think there are some very strategic value in diversity, but there are also some very practical aspects of diversity. As a battalion commander in Germany in the early 90s, some will recall there was a humanitarian disaster in Haiti, and a call went out across the Army. They're looking for Haitian speakers. Well, it so happened that my gunner was a Haitian speaker. He was 11 Bravo, staff sergeant, and he says, well, I'll go. But nowhere in his record did it show that. Think about it in the reserve components. And General Funk and I, share experiences in operational theaters with members of the reserve components who bring in an extraordinary level of experiences and expertise outside of their military occupational specialty that has proven incredibly valuable. So that, again, that diversity of backgrounds and experiences is something that I know through the Talent Management Task Force, through the various People First initiatives that the Army is working on. How do we better take advantage of that diversity that does, in fact, make our Army increasingly capable?
It's perfect segue into the question that you have up there now about organizational transparency. And I talked a little bit about how do you bring somebody into your organization. Do you ask them what their strengths are? What do we usually do? Fill out this form. Okay, yeah, how many kids, spouses, where do you live on post? Do we ever ask, what are your experiences outside the nation? What have you done? What languages do you speak? What are your hobbies? What do you want to do? How do you want to grow and learn? So, as a kind of a plug for IPSA, which is our new personnel and finance system, that's going to give us 27 different characters of which to search. Those kinds of tools are what we're learning from the wars. We do, because it goes to the great reserve components we have and the diversity and the depth of things that they can do. I needed just a short war story. When I was a brigade commander, and we were in Iraq during the surge, we were being cops and fobs, right? So we were expanding our reach in almost an ink spot manner. Well, of course, we didn't have enough vertical and horizontal engineers, so we did a query. Of course, we could do two things. We knew you were a sergeant, and you might have been an engineer. We have no idea whether you did anything in your civilian life. Well, it turns out I had a tremendous amount of carpenters and electricians and things in my organization, but I had to learn that in combat. So we have to build on these diverse experiences to show the richness of the depth of the actual expertise we have in our force.
And I want to thank Christopher from Facebook for asking that question about organizational transparency and simple and enduring things leaders can actually do to build that. You have experience with that?
I do. So Army leaders, one of the things that Army leaders bring is the connection with those that they serve with. So being present, right? It's the old game show. You must be present to win, right? I mean, if you're an Army leader, whether you're a fire team leader or the commander of the United States Army Training and Doctrine Command, if you don't find time, if you don't purposely make time to be with those that you lead, then the transparency isn't there. It's always the question. Funk's thinking, and not that General Funk has the opportunity to meet with every soldier in Training and Doctrine Command, but can personal visits, social media, as we just discussed, sessions such as this. Leaders have to be engaged, and the more engaged they are, the more transparent they are And leaders have to be, as hard as it is, to sometimes, be a little bit thick-skinned and not be overly sensitive when somebody voices their concern that they don't particularly like something that you just did, and the opportunity to explain, we did this because, and learn from that as well.
And Jim, you mentioned funk fundamentals. One of them, number 39, I think it is leadership's a contact sport.
Right.
You've got to be there every day. You got to show up, and you're not going to get it right every day, but you got to get in the game. You got to be present in the moment.
We have a couple minutes left. Army.mil, the Center of Military History, has started to showcase their 30th anniversary of Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Both of you served in that theater. So, what are your memories of that conflict?
So I was late to Desert Storm. Served as an advisor with the Saudi Arabia National Guard after the combat phase. So the fighting had largely subsided. But what I learned from that was the value of allies and partners. We think back to that time. It was an extraordinary coalition effort that was put together, and the operations of the joint force. So those lessons have stayed with me. And one of the things that I learned in that experience is, and subsequent experiences, particularly in multinational engagements, the United States Army, more precisely, American soldiers, are held up in almost every country as the aspirational ideal of professionalism and ethical behavior. Now, that doesn't mean your head should swell too much, but it is an understanding that in just about every other country in the world, they look to you. They look to you for the model of what the behavior of a soldier should be. Competence, to be sure. Courage, absolutely. But a strong moral component to your behavior as well.
Yeah, character and commitment are the other C's to that. So Desert Storm is a deeply personal thing to me. My father-in-law was the Army commander, commanded 3rd Army. John Yosak is his name. I can picture getting out of the car. My dad was actually my division commander. I can actually picture myself still to this day getting out of the car and leaving my 9-month pregnant wife with our 16-month-old son and our baby daughter on the way in a snowy in Friedberg, Germany, and getting on a bus to go get on an airplane to go to a conflict. We were told that we were going to have big casualties, and it was going to be a tremendous undertaking. It was America's, as it turns out, 100 hours, America's perhaps best first battle ever. But that was built in the years by the veterans of Vietnam who would not or could not allow us to fail. They were morally and ethically committed to the tough training and duty and responsibility that it was going to take to change the Army. They were committed to that. And so at the end of the day, that is a deeply personal time for me in the Army, and kind of set out for the rest of my career to realize that giving back to having the honor of wearing the cloth of our nation is in fact that, and honor, and should be always built on.
Well, I definitely encourage folks who are in the audience to go to the U.S. Center of Military History. Again, that's history.army.mil. TRADOC.mil to find out all these great stories that are out there. I have a friend who wrote a book on it, Colonel Scott Lingenfelter, on the role of artillery. So just
Desert Red Leg.
That's right. We've all heard of this
there
book.
you go. So great 30-year anniversary. Folks need to get smart on it if they aren't already.
And when conditions permit, get to the National Museum of the United States Army in Fort
Absolutely.
Benning, and you'll see Desert Shield Storm highlighted there as well.
Exactly right. And don't forget to reach out and thank a vet.
So I have the greatest job in the world, I think. I get this front row seat every month for these LPD webinars. And again, the time has just flown by. I really appreciate General Ham, General Funk, this opportunity to learn from you both today. And I would just turn it over to you, General Ham, for some maybe closing thoughts.
Well, thanks, Jim. And General Funk, thanks for the invitation to join TRADOC today. You know, I have some background in TRADOC as a major at the infantry school and as a brigade commander with a training support brigade at Fort Benning. I guess what I would say to this group, I would close with a quote from General of the Army George Marshall, and it was in his farewell address to the Army. And General Marshall, legendary leader for our nation and for our Army, General Marshall said, "In the end, I have done my best, and I hope I have sown some seeds which may bring forth good fruit." That's what we expect of you. That's what we expect of every Army leader, to do your very best every day. Candidly, you can't do any more, and the nation you serve expects no less. You know, there's an old athletic challenge that says, how hard would you play today if you knew you couldn't play tomorrow? That's a pretty good mentality for an Army leader to have.
So, as I said when I started, General Ham and I actually share a common heritage and lineage, and that's the Big Red One. Well, if you take BRO, Big Red One, and you take it out for him, you could say, be brave, responsible, and on point for the nation. That's what our Army needs to do. That's where we need to go. And frankly, although they didn't do as well as they wanted to here in the semifinals, I have always loved that saying as they walk out of the stadium, Notre Dame Stadium, and it says, "Play like a champion today." We get the opportunity to wear the jersey of the greatest team on earth. Let's leave that jersey in a better place every day. Thanks, General Ham, one of my mentors and friends. It's been a great day, and I really appreciate you coming and sharing this time with us.
Thanks, General Funk. Thanks, Jim.
General Ham, General Funk, great conversation. Thank you again very much. These webinars continue, though, so while this one we'll make sure is up on Vimeo and LinkedIn for folks to see, I hope folks will tune in again for our next LPD webinar on the 17th of February, 1100 Eastern, featuring musician, author, double amputee, and soldier for life, J.P. Lane. We're definitely looking forward to hearing from him. And again, if you missed any portion of today's webinar or would like to watch a previous episode and other supplemental videos, including some of your questions from today, visit and follow our LinkedIn page at U.S. Army TRADOC or find us on Vimeo where all the videos are showcased. Until next time, thanks for watching. Keep the conversation going. Build your cohesive team. Victory starts here.